Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for us to have you here and to restart this course of webinar. It is really a pleasure for us to have today with us Dr. Anton Ussi, that is the Operation and Finance Director of EATRIS. He has a background as an engineer and SME administrator, and is a specialist in establishment and execution of strategic public-private and public-public collaboration based on the development of high-value translation research. Anton is also co-responsible for development of several ongoing public projects. And he will tell us today about REMEDI4ALL, that it's a repurposing project. And he will tell us the possibility of repurposing in rare bone disease and also the aspect connected to clinical trial readiness. Thank you very much, Anton, for your availability, and we are really eager to listen what you will tell us.
Good morning. Welcome to the ERICA Work Package 4 presentation on drug repurposing and how it relates to clinical trial readiness and what's necessary for being clinical trial ready in the drug repurposing initiatives. My name is Anton Ussi. I'm the Operations and Finance Director at EATRIS, and I'm very grateful to the amazing work of the EATRIS REMEDI4ALL team led by Don Lowe, Alicia Soler-Canton, and Martin Ducourt, who drive this very large consortium. You'll hear more about that a bit later. So let's get into it, shall we? As we know, drug repurposing does have promise to reduce the cost and timelines associated with drug development, which can help it in rare diseases specifically because it might be able to make access to patients of innovative medicines and useful medicines more easy through a lower risk development process, because we have clinical benefit already demonstrated in some populations, either through clinical trials or already marketing and use in patients. Therefore, also a safety record has been demonstrated, at least in clinical trials, if not more. And you can access the drug product, which is not necessarily an easy thing for in all situations. Once you show evidence that a repurposed drug has clinical benefit in your patient population and a new indication, there are two routes that you can get it to patients in the long term. The easier, possibly easier, is the off-label use, where by entering clinical guidelines and use that way through an informal mechanism where there's no formal regulatory authorization process, patients are able to access this through the prescription routines of the clinicians. Or the more formal method to do that is that the company or the companies, in the case of generics, that have the marketing authorization for the original indication apply for a label extension, or new companies apply for a new indication, but that wouldn't be repurposing them. So you can do that nationally or via the European Medicines Agency in the central procedure. That would be valid for all of Europe. That doesn't guarantee reimbursement, but it does guarantee that it falls formally under the regulatory purview of the European Medicines Agency. So the question is off-label the right way to do things? Should we be going to extension and on-label? Let's have a look at what the pros and cons might be there. Utilizing off-label is often a route, but from a systemic or structural perspective, I think a lot of people would argue that it's not a healthy route necessarily for healthcare systems and for the patients that are getting the drugs off-label, because there are quite a few failings. For instance, there's been at no point an actual formal evaluation of a regulatory body whose job it is to safeguard the safety of patients, to look at the scientific evidence and be able to have a reasoned decision on the utility of this drug in this new indication. There's no data collection, no pharmacovigilance in the off-label setting. That brings about issues with liability. If there are adverse events, who is then liable if it's not formally prescribed through a label on a marketing authorization holder? There are reimbursement issues as well. Many countries, if it's off-label, will not reimburse. So this is okay for a 5-cent a pill drug, possibly, but when you start talking about some of these more innovative drugs that can be many thousands for a course, that becomes a very major issue for the patients. Supply concerns. There have been many instances in the past of drugs that have stopped being manufactured, even though they're essential and life-saving for a rare disease, for instance, that uses it off-label. They've been stopped to be manufactured because the larger indication no longer was viable from a market perspective. And there's nothing you can do about it. Then suddenly your drug disappears. So with thanks to Gautier Bush of the Anti-Cancer Fund, who had assembled this slide and presented it elsewhere. So how does it work getting medicine onto label? Let's assume that you want to go the whole way and really help patients ensure long-term access, broad access, equitable access by going on label. How does that work? Well, there are two routes. There's a new marketing authorization application, and there's the extension of an existing marketing authorization application. Both routes require a company, that's the marketing authorization holder, to submit the data. So it's up to that company to do that. So you can't, as an academic, do that alone. And depending on the application type there are different incentives that you can go for each of these routes. So I think the most important conclusion here is going on label is probably the best way from a systems perspective and for long-term safeguarding of the patient care. But you have to do that in connection with a marketing authorization holder, which means you're going to have to engage companies at some point in the future, which isn't as scary or as bad as it sounds. So in order to do that, what you want to do is be able to also engage them with a dossier of data that is going to be intriguing and robust. So to get to clinical trial readiness and build a clinical trial that's going to reach endpoints, is going to recruit sufficient patients, and is going to be able to assemble a dossier of data that you can be happy with, you're going to need quite a few elements besides the hypothesis. So very obviously, you need to be able to identify sufficient patients. And in rare and ultra-rare diseases, that's absolutely no trivial feat to do so. So you're inevitably going to have to go multinational. You're going to need to have access to registries to be able to identify those patients. Do you have a clinically validated endpoint that the regulators are going to agree is quantifiable and is going to be able to give you a useful efficacy signal with the number of patients you may have access to? So also this entails regulatory engagement, or at least awareness of what the current gold standard would be there if there is already one. Do you have that network of clinical trial sites across different countries? So the clinical trial units and also the investigators that would participate in the trials, and being able to manage all of those processes. The complexity of running a multinational clinical trial is always underestimated, always takes a lot longer, and it's much harder to recruit patients than was officially envisioned or formally envisioned. And what are your patient engagement activities? Patient co-creation is not a window dressing exercise. It's incredibly important. Co-design and championing of the patients to mobilize resources is an enormously important part of any activities nowadays in the research process. We'll come back to the patient engagement a bit later. So from the perspective of drug repurposing itself, there are quite a lot of questions you're going to have to answer. There's quite often a misconception that because you're testing a known drug in this new patient population, you just got to dose a few patients, get a good signal, and then boom, it's going to be ready for proposing to the regulators for a label extension. Sadly, that's not the case, because it could be that the drug needs to be reformulated. For instance, maybe the original indication was topical application, but you need to convert that to oral drug for the bioavailability. In the new tissue, are you going to be able to get the right level of drug exposure for that new indication? Or will you have to use a higher dose to get that? And if you use a higher dose, because it's a secondary target, which maybe has less affinity, are you going to be outside of the therapeutic window then and get into toxic territory? So will you need to perform new studies, for instance, new GLP tox studies? If the dose changes, you're probably going to have to do that. And those get very expensive very fast. Can you get the drug at clinical grade, GMP manufacturing? That's not necessarily always the case, and you have to ensure that GMP manufacturing is possible, getting it off the shelf or engaging a contract manufacturing organization to do that with you. And that also gets expensive. Are you referring to old data? If there's historic data that you're referring to, is that out of date? It could be that the regulatory process has changed considerably in that disease area since that old drug was first approved. So it may be that the regulator does not find that quality or level of evidence sufficient for the current regulatory standards. So a lot of questions that remain to be answered, but important ones to be aware of at least understand the process and the future hurdles you're going to have to jump over so that you're not wasting your time and, more importantly, the time of your patients. So getting that clinical trial application, clinical trial authorization requires quite a lot of activities. Some of these may be necessary, all of them may be necessary, maybe you're lucky very few are necessary, but these are questions you have to answer when you already have your drug and new indication hypothesis. You have to really think about this. So are you going to be able to understand the functional activity and the potency, the PK and the PDE and the efficacy of the drug? Do you have a biomarker to identify the new patients? What about the dosing for the in vivo? How are you going to come up with a reasonable dose range that you can justify and is credible? What are the pharmacological assays that you're going to use, and are these gold standard? What about the manufacturing? So there's lots of questions here. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's important that you are aware of each and can have a discussion with experts in the field who can help you really go through these, and also to engage the regulators as early as possible to understand that. So for a clinical trial application, quite a large document is necessary. If you see that number 4, the IMPD, the Investigational Medicinal Product Dossier, large dossier, really contains a lot of information, some of which you can borrow from the previous, hopefully from the previous filing, but a lot is also possibly going to be new as well. So you do need to provide a lot of data to justify the safety of the patients that you're going to try the drug in the new setting. So it's by no means taken for granted that you can get a new clinical trial simply because the drug was already used elsewhere, because the new context brings with it new risks. For repurposed drugs, the IMPD is a big document, but can be streamlined. So you can reduce the amount of new work you have to do because you can rely on a lot of the previous work, hopefully. Coming back to patient engagement, and here with big thanks to the REMEDI4ALL patient championing teams at Claudia at Eurodis and Rick Thompson at Beacon for Rare, who developed the slide and are doing amazing work in the patient championing work we're doing. You'll see that patient engagement not only is essential, but it's also something that you conduct from day one, really, and all the way through to the end. So you see that in the clinical development phase, which we're referring specifically today, you need to be working with patients to develop jointly with them patient-relevant outcome measures, also patient-centered outcome measures, so measures that are important for them. You'd be very surprised at how many companies fail in this respect and come up with measures that end up with a drug that actually doesn't really give relevant relief to patients, and so can be a source of failure there. Also, designing the clinical trial protocol with patients is very important, especially if you want patient retention and recruitment. Then designing the patient-facing materials, again, in order to be able to help the patients understand in a very clear way what is expected of them, what they can expect in the trial, and help to actually draw them to the trial so that you can reach the recruitment targets. And then jointly with them, developing that strategy on recruitment and retention. Patients are a very vocal, very active group of people. Utilize that energy to help develop the drug that gives them the most value. Beyond just that phase of the clinical in any disease area, we're disease agnostic. Obviously, today we focus on rare diseases. So anybody with an awesome repurposing hypothesis with the concept of they thinking, okay, this drug is going to be in this new indication, also very, very efficacious. You want to take that and go from that amazing science, and you want to develop towards clinical trials that really show the clinical benefits in the relevant population with relevant endpoints. You want to utilize that for regulatory submissions so that you can get high-value medicine on label so that it has a strong long-term effect for your patient population, so that those people in need have repurposed drugs on a market and are available to them. Patient need is in all of these places, and also need for support and expertise in all of these places. So the REMEDI4ALL vision is to make it patient-driven, but open, accessible, and end-to-end, so you really can get all the input that you need. Obviously, end-to-end is a lot of work. So you see here, IATRIS is not alone in this. We are very grateful to work with a really world-class consortium of infrastructures, of facilities, of research funders, of patient advocacy organizations, who are really pushing and working really hard together to assemble the value chain, all the bricks and the brains necessary for all the steps of high-value drug repurposing. So once this value chain is assembled, and in fact today we're already accepting new projects for discussions. We're not yet running wet work on new projects. We have 4 demonstrators, but we are accepting projects in terms of having discussions and helping people understand the steps they're going to take. The idea is that with anybody coming with a therapeutic hypothesis at any phase of development can come to us, and we can look at projects, we can help understand the steps they'll have to take. If we become partners to collaborate on the development of it, we'll do a selection process, onboard them. Every single project will get a patient champion involved, as it's essential for that patient-driven element to it. From that, we form specifically designed repurposing development teams, multidisciplinary, to enable fast transition towards clinical development, and further, on the basis of that, create a development plan called an RDP, a repurposing development plan, and then go into execution so that we have a very strong critical path that focuses on that ultimate goal of getting new treatments for patients. So I mentioned that we're open and accessible already at the moment. While not formally operating the infrastructure, you are very welcome to come and talk to us. We have the opportunity to have onboarding calls with the IATRIS REMEDI4ALL team run by Don Lowe and Alicia and Martin. We'd love to hear from you, hear about your project, hear any questions you have. And we're also open for collaboration, also for fundraising and support in the design process. We go slowly, but we are open to hear your questions, and we'd love to hear from you. Wishing you all the success with your repurposing project in the future. And we hope that you have seen sufficiently and are enthusiastic about the idea of getting drugs on label in repurposing, because this really is the best systemic way for your patients to be ensured strong access and reimbursement and proper data filing. Wishing you all the best, and thank you very much for your attention today.
Good afternoon. I think I'm live. I'm hoping I'm live, but I've just got to change my screen here. So I hope that was reasonably helpful. The session is being recorded. I don't know if I've gone onto stage. Now I've come onto stage, I think. So good afternoon, everybody. I hope that was a reasonably useful set of slides. So basically I think the main conclusion being try to build a data set that's going to be amenable for regulatory processes later as well, not just for displaying evidence of an academic character, because by collaborating with an industrial partner to actually help get the drug on label in the new indication is really the safest way forward for the benefit of patients, in terms of higher chance of guaranteeing drug supply in the future. So we do welcome questions. I'm looking if there is any questions in the chat. I don't see any, so I'm going to ask Don and the rest of the REMEDI4ALL team that's online to join the stage. Can you press join stage? Don, Alicia, anybody available to join? Because what we'll do, Martin, thanks for joining. Great. Don, hello. And Alicia, if you're there as well. Because what I'll do, we don't have any live questions, but what would be good, let's have a discussion on this. So almost turn this into a panel session. Hello, Alethea. Thanks for joining. Okay, good. So this is the EATRIS Remedy4ALL team, which who are busy developing the program. And we're already fielding, I think, 4 to 6 inquiries per week from the concierge. So there's a lot of interest in drug repurposing. So now I try to convey it, the question to you, Don, to start. I try to convey it through the messaging, but what would you say if a clinician comes to you and says, why would you bother trying to go through that whole process of engaging industry to go on label? Is it really necessary? What would your response be?
Well, I think you had covered the topic well in terms of the items. The one that I would probably pick out the most would be patient accessibility. That is, that certainly the regulations vary from country to country within Europe and globally. And really, no matter how great the data set, if you simply publish in Lancet, let's say, and on the academic side, people are excited, it doesn't really lead necessarily to patient accessibility. There is this possibility of off-label usage, as you say, but then that puts the pressure really on the individual physician and the patient to self-educate themselves, make sure they're up on the literature. And if your physician hadn't happened to read that paper, that physician wouldn't know about it. And in various countries, certainly in the United States, prescribing off-label is easy to do on the one hand, but then the physician takes personal liability for any malpractice or any negative results that come from it. So I would say the bottom line is if you really want to get this important new medicine to patients, you have to get it on label.
Super. Thanks, Don. Luca, thanks very much for joining the stage. Much appreciated. So Luca Sangiorgi is as the work package leader of work package 4 of ERICA and well known in the rare disease circles. I'm sure we don't need any further introduction. Luca, maybe a question for you. As a clinician yourself, what are the barriers for you to go down that more formal route? If you see a good repurposing candidate, you want to build the evidence, and if you would want to go to the on-label route, what are the challenges that you would face as a clinician? Or is that a path you haven't yet been down?
Well, thank you for involving me in this very in this discussion. Well, I mean, as you know, we are part of REMEDI4ALL also with testbed. And most of the activities that you have illustrated today in the webinar are the activity that we went through. The first aspect that I think it would be absolutely relevant to underline is the aspect connected to academic trial or academic studies, meaning that, as you were correctly highlighting, there are, I would say, tons of good ideas in the drawers of researchers, but they really cannot find a good solution and good support to bring this on the stage, to bring this kind of activity on the stage, since they are really missing most of the activity that actually we are currently doing for our pilot. So I would say that this activity is really enlightening in many ways, also for those that are planning any kind of academic clinical trial, meaning think before doing, not after or while you're doing it, because this is one of the critical aspects that you might have. And honestly speaking, and unfortunately, in the rare disease world, it is not so uncommon to find a situation in which a trial, I would say I wouldn't say started, but announced, prepared, and then it wouldn't be able to start since people are facing so many hurdles. I'm involved also in another rare disease clinical trial, actually in ultra rare disease. And we had 12 months postponement of the starting of the trial due to the fact that we were not ready. I mean, the coordinator was not ready to fulfill all the requests in this case, from the regulators. So I think that this is one of the aspects that is more critical, meaning kind of a checklist procedure, let's say, advice on what is really necessary. And we had also within the work package 4 meeting, another meeting on what is really, actually 2 meetings, what is really needed even before thinking about the clinical trial. But I think that we are closing the circle with this webinar, meaning that clear indication and a clear structure to whom you can ask question, to whom you can go for in order to get this kind of advice, information is there. And again, what is really critical in my vision is to get the right people that will give you the right advice.
Great.
That's the starting point from the clinical standpoint.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, we're learning. We hope that we will be good learners, and but in many ways, what is critical is that if we don't do this exercise, we are raising expectancy in the patient. You were clearly mentioned the collaboration with patient during your talk. That is absolutely fundamental. But one of the critical parts is to raise expectancy that you are not able to fulfill. And that's a really critical point to be taken into consideration when you start thinking about a clinical trial.
Indeed. Yeah. Thanks, Luca. That's a really, really good point. And I think the current way the academic funding cycle works, it makes it very challenging for your average academic to access all of these different expertise fields to be able to design that trial in the most patient-centric, but also regulatory compliant and proof way. And knowing then also all the ethical processes you're going to have to take, especially in multinational clinical trials. And I think that is the challenge that we're trying to address through REMEDI4ALL by creating this one-stop shop. So I think it's important to note, for instance, that ECRN is also a partner in this who can provide advice on the multinational aspects of rolling out a trial. And also through IATRIS, we have a broad network also of clinical key opinion leaders and patients also we can access in the championing process for the trial design itself. So it's really about engaging the right people at the design phase, as Luca said, not after. This is a question to all of the IATRIS team there. We've had quite a lot of requests already of interested parties from coming through our concierge, people who have projects. Anybody of you want to sort of give a feeling of what you've already learned so far? Where is the field? What are the kind of questions we're getting through? What level of development? Who's contacting us, for instance?
Well, it's really covered the entire spectrum. We've had many patient groups, a lot of patient groups or individual patients' families call, academic researchers, clinical researchers, some that have just a little bit of data, some that have maybe just Googled some ideas, some that have finished a phase 3 clinical trial and are really challenged by the question that you pose, Anton, is whether to just rely on publication and using off-label usage of an existing product, but then having the same concerns about what accessibility will be, what compliance will be, what sustainability of the drug supply, particularly if it's an old drug that perhaps is not being used very much in the approved indications now. So lots of questions like that. One of the most intriguing sectors we've gotten calls from are the funders, actually, Luca. So as you say, we all of us need help and support being sometimes a euphemism for expertise, but also money, in that things cost a lot. And over the years, I think, particularly over the past 5 or 10 or 15 years, I think a number of charitable funders around the world that may focus on this or that indication or a set of diseases have become increasingly frustrated that despite millions of euros or dollars invested in research over the years, that all they got was a bunch of Nature papers, and that's the top, having a Nature paper, let's say, or Lancet paper, and really frustrated that the work hasn't translated more quickly into more treatments for patients. And so whether it's Remedy4ALL through the concierge call or different activities at EATRIS, which have been ongoing over the past decade, or anywhere else around the world, I think there's an opportunity now to bring all the people on the discovery and unmet medical needs side, so patients, academics, clinicians, together with funders, to have a more coherent point of view in terms of what are the next steps that have to be done, and whether they're on the patient natural history side, or on the scientific side, on the regulatory side, or the marketing side, or the payer side, really to have the whole ecosystem work better together in a synchronized fashion. So we understand, as Luca was saying, you should ask the questions at the beginning, not at the end. So you need to even ask the question about, well, will the healthcare systems even pay for this medication if I can help get it all the way into market authorization? So it's intriguing that even some funders have called us through the concierge call to kind of better understand how Remedy4ALL may help connect these different disparate parties, or these different parties that in the past have been disparate in terms of not being sufficiently connected.
Thank you, Don. Much appreciated. So if I'm a researcher and I have recently ascertained sort of the driver pathways or some key molecules involved in a rare disease, but I haven't yet generated the disease drug hypothesis, and I would be looking for support on how to do that. Is there a way that Remedy4ALL can help researchers at that phase where they don't yet have the hypothesis? Do we have tools that can support them?
Well, certainly that's part of our ultimate platform building approach. So we as you mentioned, we're only a year old. And the platform, as we envisioned it, is a partner, Luca, as you said, somebody you can talk to from the very beginning to the end. But of course, we have limited bandwidth, and at the moment, we're probably focusing most of our bandwidth on projects that already have an identified drug candidate for further study, particularly along the regulatory path or the clinical path. But the tools that we're putting together, that we hope to debut pretty soon, will help, we hope, help to support investigators even at an earlier stage of discovery. And in fact, one of the 4 projects we have as a demonstrator project is is exactly at the level that you're saying, that there's a general intention and appreciation for what the hypothesis should look like, but we haven't quite yet identified the drug candidate, or at least not finalized what the drug candidate would be. So through that demonstration project, through the platform tools that we hope to debut soon, and through the concierge, we're very happy to discuss and help provide any tips towards other resources or investigators or collaborators anyone could turn to. We think we can help there, but I think we start really being able to add value, I think, when you're pretty close or at the point of thinking, aha, this is it, this is the drug, or this is the target, or this is what we needed to do to crack this open and really finally bring an important new medicine to an unmet need in patient populations.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, so also through work package, through our in silico work package driven by FIM, that I think that page is live now, right? With the selection of tools that were created, I believe. Maybe
I think it's I think it's pseudo live, but not really publicized yet, Martin. Is that right? But I think we're going to get there.
Yeah, we have made an inventory of close to 200 in silico tools that are, I think, now available via the resources page on the Remedy4ALL website. Maybe somebody can put a link in the chat or share afterwards. And that is a collection of at least tools that have been kind of approved on the basis of experience by the consortium members to be helpful in silico supported repurposing hypothesis driven initiatives. I think there's another question in the chat in the meantime on an unrelated topic, but I think that's indeed, as Don says, the next step that we are currently mostly focusing on, and that is the step where a market authorization holder joins as a partner. So the question specifically is if we have been successful so far in getting positive reactions from market authorization holders to develop a drug on the basis of academic clinical trials. And this is indeed, I think, a very interesting place where the activity, especially in the field of rare diseases, are. And the last year, the EMA and various European stakeholders have also supported such a process with the so-called STAMP pilot, which is a repurposing pilot where there's a regulatory assessment of such a package, data package coming forth from clinical trials, and the fit for purpose for market authorization. And it is a very good initiative, but it also still leaves out the problem or the solution that you have a market authorization holder actually taking it all the way to the market. So what we are also building on in this consortium is a network where we have, for instance, generic manufacturers reviewing those opportunities, and we are starting to get early dialogue with such organizations, and I think more than you would maybe expect. And it's also a matter of providing a good platform to communicate and also be transparent, be an objective, independent partner in this. And this is looking positive. That especially also for areas of rare disease, difficult business models, there is a basis for working together, and there is interest in academic clinical trials with such data. Yes.
If I may nuance that as well, I think what we've been finding in the last, since starting REMEDI4ALL, was that there's been a huge interest, interestingly enough, from the generics industry. They really would like to collaborate on projects and would like to be part of the solution. So we definitely see a lot of interest there. And every time we've brought a request to them in the last year, there have been several companies that have jumped up and said, this is interesting, we'd like to talk, at least start the discussions. So there's definitely interest there. When we're talking about repurposing of drugs that are currently on patent, so still in their monopoly phase, what happens is these tend to be very high net worth drugs, so there could be several billion euros a year in revenues. The larger companies, they tend to be a little nervous of new data sets being generated that aren't in their control. So they tend to be a little bit more held back. They will collaborate, and they are patient-facing and patient-centric, but they can be a bit nervous about letting go of control of the data collection process and not understanding new disease contexts as well. So one issue is that if a company doesn't, for instance, work in a specific therapeutic area, they don't have the scientific expertise to evaluate projects and evaluate ideas. So it's difficult for them to jump into new spaces as well if they don't have the infrastructure there. So the large pharma, the innovative pharma companies, it can be more difficult, but it's nonetheless still very much worthwhile approaching them, and there are many success stories. In fact, we were lucky enough to be given a data set by a very large pharma company for one of our demonstrators, which we'll be able to publicly announce soon. But it was, there was no benefit for the company whatsoever, but they took time to dig out a data set generated 30 years ago almost, and give that pro bono for the benefit of the patient population under investigation. So there's a lot of generosity there as well. So it's definitely an ad hoc process. One by one, you just got to try and find the right people, I think, is the way to do it.
So Anton, I think you've answered the question in the question chat. Have you seen it?
Yes. The one. Do you have a positive reaction by the the authorization?
Yeah, generally speaking, generally very positive, I think.
Indeed, it has been.
I would say that the aggregate experience in the field is that you have a very good chance of getting a positive reaction. But one of the toughest parts is to get in touch with the right person or people to talk to at a company, particularly a very large company. And certainly as part of the platform and our activities at Remedy4ALL, we're trying to establish more systematic ways that we can match an investigator, academic, or a clinician with the right people in the right company. And so as maybe Martin was referring to a couple projects we have along these lines. So we're just testing this new mechanism, which we hope to broaden one of these days even into the unpatented medicines as well. It's one of the observations that is made a lot is that while generic manufacturers have historically generally been more open to these kinds of discussions, well, eventually a non-patent goes off patent, and the closer you get to off patent, the more a company starts to wonder about what life after the patent cliff looks like. And many of you probably noticed that some of the big pharmaceutical companies that used to sell only, manufacture and market only branded medications now have their own divisions that manufacture their own generics. So what we're hoping is that the whole drug repurposing community, and we hope we can help from Remedy4ALL, can help change the perception a bit too, between these being two completely separate categories of drugs, that is on patent versus generic, as being a more continuous life cycle of that from a company's point of view, life cycle management of a product, and from a patient's and scientist's point of view, more opportunity to anticipate new uses for an existing drug even before they reach the patent cliff, however that works out.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Much appreciated. And now, if a researcher wants to apply for either preclinical or for a clinical trial, and they would come and knock on our door, are we able to already provide support and advice on that process so that they can design a study or design studies that are on the critical path, that are the most relevant studies to do at the right time?
Well, maybe we can give a very soft answer to that. So in theory, yes. And in theory, we'd love to be able to provide at least some large-scale pointers, like really the steps are this, or you should consider this or that. At the moment, we probably don't have enough bandwidth to have an everyday partnership, a real day-by-day continuous partnership with a large-scale project. This is something that we're building into the Remedy4ALL platform, that is a funders network also, that would then help steer such a project and match such a project together with potential funders as well, because that aspect of support, the financial support, is what we'll also need for new projects coming on board into Remedy4ALL to really be able to access all the expertise and talent that we have across the consortium. So kind of yes and no. We can definitely help bootstrap a new project, at least give initial guidance, but to really be able to provide a full partnership with the project, we would have to work together too to identify new funding sources.
Great. Yeah, great. Thank you. And that also includes if people need, for instance, if somebody's looking for a company, they have a mature project and looking for a company, we can help point them in the right direction, right? We can make introductions as necessary. Is that right?
No, absolutely. And there's another category that as a former academic, it seems like a unicorn, but there are cases where a project has funding but not enough expertise. Or maybe you think you have enough expertise, but maybe you're missing a few pieces, and it takes so much time to find that last expert or that last resource that you need to have a project really come together as a full project. So sometimes, or very often, it's not a money gap as much as an expertise gap. And we're certainly worth talking to there too. So it's a resource that, if it's missing, could already be within the Remedy4ALL consortium. And in fact, the expertise you need may not take that much time. So we may have the bandwidth to be able to provide that today. So definitely give us a call if you have any questions, and we can tell you right away, is that something we can help with, not help with, or we would need funding to go for funding together.
And in the context of clinical trial readiness, one of the themes of this webinar, it's also good to highlight the role of ECRAN in our consortium when it comes to, especially for rare diseases. You often end up with multinational trials, so we can definitely put some expertise there and some support in the trial readiness there.
Indeed, yeah. And also we already have good relationships with some national competence authorities and with the EMA around repurposing. So basically any question you may have, there's no question too stupid. I think it's only stupid not to ask questions, because most of the time we don't really know what we don't know. So it's helpful to talk to people who understand the pathway and can really point out some of the snakes that are going to be hiding in the grass on the route. Any further final comments? Any questions, Luca, that you could think would be relevant from the community that you might want to ask us today before we wrap up?
I think that, you have covered most of the topics that are relevant for the rare disease community and given an answer. One of the critical points is, okay, you gave us all the information in order to approach you. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why we decided to have this webinar today. We think that this would be a good testing point also for the platform. One of the critical points, since, we are experiencing the platform and we think that it's extremely useful, meaning that it's really not, I wouldn't say a support, but really a partner in building and running the clinical trial. Are you putting in place strategy in order to make this platform stable also for the future? Because this is going to be one of the critical points, because it's like the clinical trial problem that I was mentioning before. If you reason, let's say, possibility, then people are eager to keep on going on that point. So one of the critical points is how are you planning your future, and what's in your mind regarding this point?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we're quite lucky in that because IATRIS is a permanent infrastructure, and we actually built REMEDI4ALL on an existing value chain in small molecules. And we have all of the processes for access, engagement, joint fundraising. These are already standard processes for us. Sustaining the ability to engage the community through IATRIS won't be so difficult. On top of that, all of the partners, in fact, are very much service-oriented, collaboration-oriented partners as well. We've built this value chain to be accessible. So it's not a bunch of PhDs running around doing REMEDI4ALL projects who after 4 years will disappear, but we have really built an infrastructure designed to last. And I think now by engaging the community, what we're doing is we're seeing, okay, these are the kinds of value adds that we can provide to the community. And then we basically will provide those as the services after the 5 years. And then the sustainability is through joint fundraising, participating in projects, supporting where we can add critical expertise into projects. But also with that funders network, we hope also to be able to create something perhaps more significant as well. So our goal would be to maybe even raise a fund that would be dedicated specifically to repurposing with philanthropies, charities, and national funders. So that's something we will also in parallel be working on. And you never know, maybe a few years from now, we have a couple of $100 million in the bank that you can apply for. We'll find out.
Well, Anton, on the last point, Luca, I hope you don't mind if I jump on it. But I think, as we really think about a sustainable framework across Europe, not just REMEDI4ALL per se, but all the other stakeholders that could benefit from working with the REMEDI4ALL, I think groups like the ERNs are the most natural partners in a way. At the moment, or I would say historically, I think most therapeutic hypotheses about drug repurposing come from either academic labs or physician scientist labs, and so these tend to originate on the preclinical end or an initial clinical chance observation. But what all these projects need, of course, is a clinical trial framework to have a network, a clinical trial readiness in terms of any day a drug could come in to that network and then enter into a clinical trial where not only are the patient registries already there, natural history is done ideally, but also the clinical endpoints and surrogate endpoints, if there are any, already established and ideally validated. So the idea that across the ERN network, there ought to be indications that are more or less ready for a new therapeutic drug to come into a trial. If we had a kind of a mental map or a physical map of what are the trials and indications that are most ready to have a drug repurposing trial candidate come into the network, we can work on our end really to try to steer those projects and to help support and partner those projects so we can meet at that clinical trial stage. So I think that's going to be a critical part of sustainability, because if we're just a platform, no matter how, even if we have a bag of money of 100 million euros, when projects come in, they need a good home. They need a good clinical trial context to really take them all the way through, registrable trial and into market and into clinic.
Yeah.
So let us know, all the clinical trial readies. Please, raise your hand and say, we have the perfect trial network for you. Or just what perfect drug.
Thank you, Donald, for quoting this. Since ERICA is the joint action to favor ERN research, I think that the point that you were raising is really relevant. And nevertheless, it's important also to take into consideration what both Anton and you just mentioned about registries and natural history studies, meaning that after 5-6 years, registries are starting to be ready for this kind of activity. And in many ways, and maybe there are also not only ERN registry, but the institution-based registry that could be a good starting point for exactly what you were mentioning, the clinical, to evaluate the clinical trial readiness and to evaluate if any kind of idea could be a realistic idea to be pursued. So in many ways, I think that this kind of networking that you were just mentioning with the ERN in the future year will have really, I would say, mandatory pathway to be followed in many ways. And I think that this was just one of the opportunity, and I really hope that in the future we will have many more opportunities to keep on going. But I'm pretty sure that in the I mean, they've changed the name, but in the rare diseases project that we're planning to run for the next year, this is going to be one relevant aspect to be taken into consideration, because it's mandatory to give an answer to the patient. And as you were mentioning, repurposing can provide us shorter time. And this is one of the critical points that is really much appreciated when you talk with patient association. Opportunities that are, I would say, behind the door, and that could be, let's say, make accessible to the patient in a reasonable time. This is one of the critical aspects that we will go, and that is really sensitive for all the ERNs. So thank you again for this very stimulating and interesting webinar. Please remember that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available on the website of ERICA, or other work package for website. And if you think it might be useful, please highlight the possibility to have a look to this webinar also to colleagues or friends that are couldn't make it today, even if we had a pretty good attendance, honestly speaking. Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Don, Martin, Alicia, and thanks for joining, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.